Section 55 of Gray's Anatomy Part 2.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by The Bodster. Anatomy of the Human Body Part 2 by Henry Gray. Section 8E, the muscles and fascia of the foot. The dorsal muscle of the foot. Extensor digitorum brevis. The fascia on the dorsum of the foot is a thin membranous layer continuous above with the transverse and cruciate crural ligaments. On either side it blends with the plantar aponeurosis. Anteriorly it forms a sheath for the tendons on the dorsum of the foot. The extensor digitorum brevis is a broad thin muscle which arises from the forepart of the upper and lateral surfaces of the calcaneus in front of the groove for the peroneus brevis, from the lateral talocalcanean ligament, and from the common limb of the cruciate crural ligament. It passes obliquely across the dorsum of the foot and ends in 4 tendons. The most medial, which is the largest, is inserted into the dorsal surface of the base of the first phalanx of the great toe, crossing the dorsalis pedis artery. It is frequently described as a separate muscle, the extensor hallucis brevis. The other 3 are inserted into the lateral sides of the tendon of the extensor digitorum longus of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th toes. Variations. Accessory slips of origin from the talus and navicula, or from the external cuneiform and 3rd metatarsal bones to the 2nd slip of the muscle, and one from the cuboid to the 3rd slip, have been observed. The tendons vary in number and position. They may be reduced to 2, or one of them may be doubled, or an additional slip may pass to the little toe. A supernumerary slip ending on one of the metatarsophalangeal articulations or joining a dorsal interosseous muscle is not uncommon. Deep slips between the muscle and the dorsal interosseae occur. Nerves. It is supplied by the deep peroneal nerve. Actions. The extensor digitorum brevis extends the phalanges of the 4 toes into which it is inserted, but in the great toe acts only on the first phalanx. The obliquity of its direction counteracts the oblique movement given to the toes by the long extensor, so that when both muscles act, the toes are evenly extended. The plantar muscles of the foot. Plantar aponeurosis, aponeurosis plantaris, plantar fascia. The plantar aponeurosis is of great strength and consists of pearly white glistening fibres disposed for the most part longitudinally. It is divided into central, lateral, and medial portions. The central portion, the thickest, is narrow behind and attached to the medial process of the tuberosity of the calcaneus, posterior to the origin of the flexor digitorum brevis, and becoming broader and thinner in front, divides near the heads of the metatarsal bones into 5 processes, one for each of the toes. Each of these processes divides opposite the metatarsophalangeal articulation into 2 strata, superficial and deep. The superficial stratum is inserted into the skin of the transverse sulcus, which separates the toes from the sole. The deeper stratum divides into 2 slips which embrace the side of the flexor tendons of the toes and blend with the sheaths of the tendons and with the transverse metatarsal ligament, thus forming a series of arches through which the tendons of the short and long flexors pass to the toes. The intervals left between the 5 processes allow the digital vessels and nerves and the tendons of the lumbricalis to become superficial. At the point of division of the aponeurosis, numerous transverse fasciculi are superadded. These serve to increase the strength of the aponeurosis at this part by binding the processes together and connecting them with the integument. The central portion of the plantar aponeurosis is continuous with the lateral and medial portions that sends upward to the foot at the lines of junction 2 strong vertical intermuscular septa, broader in front than behind, which separate the intermediate from the lateral and medial plantar groups of muscles. From these again are derived thinner transverse septa, which separate the various layers of muscles in this region. The upper surface of this aponeurosis gives origin behind to the flexor digitorum brevis. The lateral and medial portions of the plantar aponeurosis are thinner than the central piece and cover the sides of the sole of the foot. The lateral portion covers the undersurface of the abductor digiti quinti. It is thin in front and thick behind, where it forms a strong band between the lateral process of the tuberosity of the calcaneus and the base of the fifth metatarsal bone. It is continuous medially with the central portion of the plantar aponeurosis and laterally with the dorsal fascia. The medial portion is thin and covers the undersurface of the abductor hallucis. It is attached behind to the laciniate ligament and is continuous around the side of the foot with the dorsal fascia, and laterally with the central portion of the plantar aponeurosis. The muscles in the plantar region of the foot may be divided into three groups, in a similar manner to those in the hand. Those of the medial plantar region are connected with the great toe and correspond with those of the thumb. Those of the lateral plantar region are connected with the little toe and correspond with those of the little finger, and those of the intermediate plantar region are connected with the tendons intervening between the two former groups. But in order to facilitate the description of these muscles, it is more convenient to divide them into 4 layers in the order in which they are successively exposed. The first layer: abductor hallucis, flexor digitorum brevis, and abductor digiti quinti. The abductor hallucis lies along the medial border of the foot and covers the origins of the plantar vessels and nerves. It arises from the medial process of the tuberosity of the calcaneus, from the laciniate ligament, and from the plantar aponeurosis, and from the intermuscular septum between it and the flexor digitorum brevis. The fibres end in a tendon, which is inserted together with the medial tendon of the flexor hallucis brevis into the tibial side of the base of the phalanx of the great toe. Variations slip to the base of the first phalanx of the second toe. The flexor digitorum brevis lies in the middle of the sole of the foot, immediately above the central part of the plantar aponeurosis, with which it is firmly united. Its deep surface is separated from the lateral plantar vessels and nerves by a thin layer of fascia. It arises by a narrow tendon from the medial process of the tuberosity of the calcaneus, from the central part of the plantar aponeurosis, and from the intermuscular septa between it and the adjacent muscles. It passes forward and divides into 4 tendons, one for each of the 4 lesser toes. Opposite the bases of the first phalanges, each tendon divides into 2 slips to allow the passage of the corresponding tendon of the flexor digitorum longus. The 2 portions of the tendon then unite and form a grooved channel for the reception of the accompanying long flexor tendon. Finally, it divides a second time and is inserted into the sides of the second phalanx about its middle. The mode of division of the tendons of the flexor digitorum brevis and of their insertion into the phalanges is analogous to that of the tendons of the flexor digitorum sublimis in the hand. Variations slip to the little toe, frequently wanting 23%, or it may be replaced by a small fusiform muscle arising from the long flexor tendon or from the quadratus plantae. Fibrous sheaths of the flexor tendons. The terminal portions of the tendons of the long and short flexor muscles are contained in the osseo-aponeurotic canals, similar in their arrangement to those in the fingers. These canals are formed above by the phalanges and below by the fibrous bands, which arch across the tendons and are attached on either side to the margins of the phalanges. Opposite the bodies of the proximal and second phalanges, the fibrous bands are strong, and the fibres are transverse. But opposite the joints they are much thinner, and the fibres are directed obliquely. Each canal contains a mucous sheath, which is reflected on the contained tendons. The abductor digiti quinti. abductor minimi digiti, lies along the lateral border